Okay, so listen, your poll numbers are terrible. I mean,
you're going to believe the polls. You're going to believe the polls. You're starting off
bloviating a-hole New York businessman and this dim-witted California prosecutor who can't string a thought together, but
you're starting off repeating corporate propaganda.
It's true.
I can't believe that you are that complacent that you're going to start off with corporate propaganda.
These are the facts on the ground.
Our internal polls are through the roof.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And but for cheating, we will win this election hands down.
Yeah.
By a lot.
Internal polls. Yeah. There's just a bunch of eggs in your uterus.
I'm just saying, don't give up hope. Don't believe the lies that you see on corporate media.
Well, speaking to the Gator community, you guys have you've cornered the market on transition, right? You guys can just flip your sex at will, so that
it affords us a little bit of additional protections when we need to hide in a crowd.
Right on. The scaly skin, though, kind of. How are you dealing with that?
Oh, that's just additional like shop at the store to get some wigs and.
Yeah. Okay. Blend right in.
Yeah.
Blend right in. What's the political landscape from your point of view, other than things becoming increasingly stupid?
So there's definitely a chance that that Kamala can completely blow this, and we could be seeing, a second Trump term.
Yeah.
Which honestly, there were a couple things she could have done and basically secured her win that somehow she's just failed to do.
Really? You think that she had a chance?
I think she had a chance, primarily because you had enough people who were disenchanted with Trump, not necessarily that they were as permeated in Trump derangement syndrome, but his first term was exhausting. You would wake up, you would find out what he tweeted at 3 a.m. that had everybody upset. You would find out maybe that they had distorted something he said. So you would spend the rest of your day arguing, no, he didn't actually say that. And that was 4 years of day-to-day onslaught, not to mention the wall-to-wall coverage of, some of their attempts to remove him from office. Mm-hmm. The Russiagate scandal, so to speak, was for all intents and purposes, a complete mirage. 3 years of a complete mirage, costing us, incredible sums of money to investigate something that ultimately went nowhere. Mm-hmm. That was exhausting. And so when Joe Biden, came into office, I knew already. I actually commented, and I can pull up the comment at some point, where I said that I expect him to lose and then come back in 4 years and run again. And I said I had a slight preference in him winning last time, simply to get the 8 years done with, 8 years of a Trump involvement done with, because it was exhausting. And I knew he would come back and he would, but basically, backseat drive for Biden's administration, which he did slightly less of because he stayed on Truth Social.
Yeah.
But, he wasn't on Twitter, so he didn't do as much backseat driving as I imagined he would. But that he would come back and run again, which he, of course, did. And here we are. Now, because of the sort of lack of enthusiasm for going through another round of that exhaustion, the Democrats knew or should have known that Joe Biden was not going to be as strong of a candidate this time. I mean, he was already pretty bad of a candidate in 2020. I mean, his ability to make absolute nonsense statements that didn't even have an association to words in the dictionary, because he combined them all, combined 5 words as if he were German into one word. That they were able to ignore that because the polarization that had been done, whether it was all Trump's fault or not, the polarization was fairly strong. They should have known that he was going to be weak coming in, and that his mental faculties were relaxing, and that he wasn't going to be able to sustain, a full campaign. When that first debate happened, and that actually became apparent to those who were in denial
this year, Yeah.
Yes, yes. When that first debate happened this year, the denial became apparent to everybody. They panicked. Now, when you're panicking and you believe the worst is about to happen, anything that happens that's more positive can be a breath of fresh air, and you can possibly ride a wave of just euphoria that happens from the worst not happening.
Yeah.
You avoided
Or joy,
disaster.
even. Yeah.
Right. Like you can imagine if we were to face, one of the asteroids that was going to cause us extinction and we did blow it up. And then maybe we lost like a, half city block or something. There'd be devastation, but we didn't get annihilated. We would still be elated and possibly celebrating that we avoided extinction. There is a breath of fresh air that comes in. And Kamala's introduction was to lay low, which worked to her favor. And then the conventions was mostly energetic, and nobody really screwed up their delivery of their speeches. The first thing that really started to do her in, though, was the over control of her message. So she took the idea, people don't really know you. She kicked that up to a max and then simply repeated, I grew up in a middle class family, hundreds of times. And in the media saturated environment, we don't necessarily have the problem of your message is only going to go out to select audiences at a time. So therefore, you do need to repeat your message. You have to stay on this message in order for it to get out. It got out too many times. And she never pivoted from that to the point where you can still see when she answers a question, I grew up in a middle class home, and everybody laughs. We know that's a canned line. And so because she has not deviated from that, she threw away almost all of the breath of fresh air, free votes that she would have had. She lost all of that energy. And now that's why she's pivoting to Trump is Hitler, because that's all that she can do to try to either encourage her team to come out, because you will die if Trump is president. I mean, the rhetoric that they are throwing around is fairly extreme, right? We have the idea that they're going to have national ovulation checks where, if they think you're crossing state lines, they're going to stop you at state lines to find out if you're pregnant and on your way to an abortion. All sorts of absolute insanity that just won't happen, even if some things that happen under Trump are not preferable from a liberty standpoint. It's not going to be the absolute despotic system that they're going to paint in people's heads. So they're hoping to get their energy back by saying that Trump is the biggest threat that we have to face.
So to go back to Trump being exhausting, is that his fault? Or that seems to be orchestrated by the media and by the regime?
So it is orchestrated by the media. However, you are giving them the rope with which they're trying to hang you. So Trump should know by now that if he is not careful with his choice of words, the media will distort it and run with it.
Yeah.
I've not really seen evidence that he has taken that knowledge to heed. Okay. So when you have knowledge of how your enemy is going to, misportray you, it's not that you have to walk on eggshells necessarily, but if you don't moderate your behavior at all, then to some degree you are intentionally affording your enemy the ability to attack you.
Yeah.
And now he could be making a conscious decision that this is the correct strategy, that whenever he says something that they take out of context, he wins in some way.
Yeah.
But as the person on the other side, not part of playing his game, it's exhausting to watch.
Yeah. Okay. But with that thought of exhaustion, haven't the media, what's your stance on the media's ability to continue that fever pitch of anti-Trumpness?
I don't think it's working this time around the way that it worked the last time. Now,
yeah, it's not working.
There are enclaves
compared to 2016 and 2020.
Correct. I would agree with that assessment. There are, of course, beholden people who are tied into a set of information streams that they do not deviate from. where, of course, this sort of, I'll call it hypnotism, is absolutely working. And a movie is playing in their heads where if Trump is elected, it will become an immediate black and white transition to full Nazi uniform garb in their head. Absolutely 100%. That's still playing, even though in the broader scheme of things, it's not as effective.
But so if Trump wins and it's a decisive win, let's just say it's a decisive win, what plays out with the Democrats and the regime and the people on the ground? Will we have the same type of violence in the streets and hyperventilating in
There will, of
the
course, be
screens?
protests, and those protests will have violence in them. The violence of the protests will be downplayed in the same way that they were during the 2020 riots. And anytime large groups of progressives decide to go and burn things down. They will be downplayed. You'll see some coverage, but it won't be January 6th level type of scrutiny. If Trump wins, there will be several moves that are pseudo-legal to try to stop him from assuming the presidency. And one of those attacks will be a 14th Amendment attack saying that he's ineligible because he participated in an insurrection. Regardless of whether the fact that there's a legal standard and definition of insurrection that he actually participated in, the association has been baked in for several years that what happened on January 6th was an insurrection. Otherwise, intelligent people have convinced themselves that the United States government operates based off of capture the flag rules, and that all you had to do was sit on the throne inside of the state's capital, and all of a sudden the government became yours.
Yeah.
Okay. That's absolutely preposterous. And if you sit someone down and try to make them articulate this idea that there was a possibility that Trump could have actually, become president for a second term illegitimately through the January 6th riots, they won't be able to actually give you a mechanism. And so they will just try to deflect and repeat about how horrific it was, and maybe stopping the ceremony from Mike Pence certifying, and what if Mike Pence would have, it's that type of situation under duress is not going to meet some sort of constitutional threshold for an official legitimate event. We're not going to sit here and have, even if someone went into the Capitol with a firearm and placed it in front of Mike Pence's head and said, hey, you're going to vote this way. And he did it, right? He actually went through the motions. There isn't going to be a way in the world that's going to all of a sudden become a legitimate thing. The Supreme Court's going to go, well, he did say it. There's no situation in which I could see that anything actually legitimate where Trump would have taken office for that, in that sort of action occurs. And ultimately, I think those intelligent people know that, but they pretend they don't know that. And so they elevate January 6th to that level in order to basically say that that's the type of world we live in. However, on the flip side, when they go and they attempt to prevent Trump from taking office through their legal machinations, of which, now Kamala Harris has that role that Mike Pence played in the 2020 election. You have the 14th Amendment angle, which is he participated in insurrection because they baked the idea that that's what that was, that he was attempting to overthrow the government of the United States and reinstate himself as president through the brouhaha that existed on January 6th. And therefore, he is illegitimate and incapable constitutionally from taking office. That's going to be one of their angles. They are going to run something they've run multiple times, which they ran in 2016, which is they're going to get a whole bunch of celebrities together and they're going to try to defect the electors. They did this campaign. You can see videos if you search for them. All your favorite celebrities got together and made these very, very stern pleas to electors, saying it's your constitutional duty to make the right decision here, and you don't have to vote for Hillary when you do this, but just don't vote for Trump. Be a patriot, save your country. And so they're going to try to push that angle as well. I'm not saying that will be successful, but they will do that. So you'll have the riots, you'll have the 14th Amendment attack, you'll have the celebrities attempting to persuade electors to not vote for Trump and certify him. And then you have the question of whether cackles herself will certify his election in the Senate when she's playing Mike Pence's role.
So she has to do that.
Well, I mean, it's her duty. It's part of her responsibilities. It's what Mike Pence was tasked with on January 6th of doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so she's going to facilitate the exact same role. Now, I'm not saying she will absolutely decline, but I don't see logically how the argument they are making affords her an explanation for why she would certify it. I'm not aware of anything in progressive value systems that say when you are handing over power to a dictator who is going to remove all the liberties of the citizenry and prevent further democratic elections for the rest of America's lifetime, that the correct thing to do is just go, well, he did win the ballot counting contest, so our hands are tied. I guess despotism is what we do now. I don't see anything in their logic system that allows her to say that that's the correct action to take, which is certify the election. She may still do it. Contradictions abound and hypocrisy abound, but the logic they are presenting as a case doesn't afford them that direct explanation.
Well, but do they? It's hard for me to believe that they believe what they're saying about Trump being Hitler.
I agree.
I don't know.
They do, at least as a manifestation of their behavior, pretend that they believe it.
Yeah. Well, they kind of act more and more fascistic themselves with social media crackdowns and stuff like that. I don't think. What do you think? Accepting Twitter under Musk's ownership, will there be the same degree? And I don't know to what degree you were aware of this. I was very aware of this running a YouTube channel in 2020, the amount of lockdown that they had on freedom of speech.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm aware of a lot of the lockdown.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm aware of every instance that you are, but
okay. Yeah. I don't know, or maybe even the viewers, I don't know, but I saw like massive amounts of my comments were just deleted and then they would appear months later. Just every other video is demonetized. A lot of creators are being banned. It was very egregious. I don't know if they'll go that far this time.
So if Trump is declared the winner on election night, they will do all of those things that we just talked about to try to prevent him from taking the presidency. I'm not sure any of them will be successful, but I expect efforts for those will happen. It'll obviously be harder for them to do those if it's a blowout. So if he does, if he pulls a Reagan and you look at that entire map and all the states are red except for maybe California or something, it'll be very hard for them to even get any traction on the angle that they want to take. But if we're talking about a state where the flip of that state gives it to Kamala or Trump, and that's the deciding factor. And, if we wind up in one of those unfortunate situations where, the margin of overturning is like the 2000 Florida election, where now we have to go and recount the ballots and we're arguing over what a valid ballot is, or now apparently, according to the polls, looks unlikely that she will win the popular vote and lose the electoral college vote. But if you imagine those scenarios are what we actually enter into, they will have much more of a rhetorical ability to push this, denying thing, right? Because now it particularly that their version of the national popular vote, if she wins that, they believe that they have a moral reason to stop it. The will of the people actually said no to Trump. This stupid electoral college thing got in the way, and we can't hand over the keys to an insurrectionist who's ineligible anyway. That they'll have abilities to do that if it's not a blowout.
Okay,
now,
so
if Harris wins, because I'm going to go back to your question. If Harris wins, it will be an all-out war of the kind that they did during the Biden administration, censoring online, and in particular because of the way that Musk has inserted himself and voted for Trump. And some of the examples, I've been posting a quote that I had. I was talking on in a chat room with someone, a mutual friend of ours, but I was chatting and I said, if Kamala wins, it's going to be open season on disinformation. They are going to amplify the state, the disinformation scare, and try to, not Nina Jankowicz herself, but they're going to try to insert more people into the disinformation sphere on the federal level to talk about its importance. And I said in advance, sort of that there's going to be a lot of people on Twitter who make it hard to argue there isn't a problem. Now, I'm anti these interventions. I believe that the free speech is important, and you can go to the free speech absolutist if you want to. That's, you can think that that's fair, fine. And so I'm against any sorts of restrictions like that, particularly from the federal government. But the recent quote account Black Patriot, who put out a accusation that he was in contact with a victim of sexual assault from Tim Walz.
Yeah.
He and others like it. Now, I said this before he did that stunt, whoever that is. But I said there's going to be people out there who make the argument very difficult as to why the bullshit they're doing online has any value in society. Yeah. It's a very difficult argument to make. In contrast, now when he started pulling that stunt, and if just to recap what it was, if people weren't familiar with it, there was a relatively popular account, several 100,000 followers with some big names, who had several weeks ago pushed the idea that there was a whistleblower from ABC who had said that the debate was rigged in some way, where Kamala was able to get assurances about what questions would or would not be asked so that she could conspire with ABC basically to gang up on Trump during that debate. That claim never went anywhere. And then he followed up with this accusation that he had been in touch with someone who was sexually assaulted by Tim Walz back in the 90s. And he came up with this storyline that people started to believe had validity. Basically starting to lay out times and events and things that happened in the 90s during that time period. So there was a line of this story, this narrative that said that the sexual assault victim had gone to an Indigo Girls concert with Tim Walz in 1996. And well, if you go and you look online, you can find this Indigo Girls concert. And there is an article recently in a LGBT magazine talking to the Walzes about them doing gay and lesbian outreach during the 90s and taking students who were gay to more gay accepting events to try to reach out to people who might be cloistered or cut off from society otherwise at the time. And so there were details of this story that would make it sound plausible. And if you weren't necessarily thinking that someone could have just researched things that happened at the time and constructed a story based off of the details of things that they found, like finding an article that says that Tim Walz took people to this Indigo Girls concert, if you didn't really think that someone could go backwards, find details, and then make a story involving those details so that it was more plausible, people were starting to believe this story, and it started to gain traction. And this guy was doing this weird teaser where he was laying out these details very slowly so that people were engaged and they wanted to know the next detail because the thing that he was providing wasn't enough. So they wanted more and they wanted more. And then he disappeared. And accounts like that who make things plausible in some way to people who are trying to get scintillating information during a time of political combat, they may allow their defenses, their skeptical defenses, to come down, and they may accept information they should be really more skeptical of. And things like that wind up being difficult to argue why they are legitimate things to go on. Yeah. And when you have a difficulty in arguing that, disinformation systems that go and fight that seem like a reasonable approach, right? We should have a way of trying to combat that. And then you get the uprising of the fact checkers, and then you have the government talking to the platforms in the background saying, we believe this is fake, which of course affords the Hunter Biden laptop situation where they go, oh, you're going to get a laptop story. Oh, this is totally dangerous and fake and from Russia, so you better suppress it. And then you get people acting. That's the way that's going to sneak in, and it's going to come really high, really strong, if and that I bet you that Wall's story will be an exemplar case.
And it doesn't matter how many times the regime and the legitimate mainstream media do the exact same thing to Trump or their opposition.
It does not matter.
It does not matter at all.
No, not in the slightest. In the sense that there are enough people beholden to their information streams that the permeation of the message in those streams will convince enough people that anyone else who thinks differently or has different understanding of the facts and the details, or a memory of all the times that the government did use that power for ill and partisan gain. They will still have to face the argument at face value that individual examples where we all know that the story was stupid or bullshit have a reason to exist, or should be allowed to even attempt to exist. It's a hard conversation to navigate around when you're talking about solutions, quote, to the problem. So there will be a definite motive force.
What's the worst possible outcome of the next 2 weeks, the election?
Close, and Kamala wins in a very narrow way, this similar to 2020. I don't necessarily see Trump backing down from claims of voter fraud. It's going to be particularly strong this time, given in the last couple of weeks, it seems the momentum is all on Trump's side. The polls are not looking as good as they were for Joe Biden. So right now,
these
I believe
trustworthy polls from your point of view, insofar as polls can be trusted. Do you trust
I would say it doesn't necessarily matter how trustworthy the polls are. It matters more what people's perceptions of the future will be based on those polls. So the future that they paint, whether they are right or wrong, that might matter if you're saying, are the polls accurate to predicting who's going to win on election day? But to the degree they are wrong, now you are having people they're not rejecting the polls when they see all the polls start to agree or start to trend in one direction. They're all going to start to believe them. The Democrats are getting nervous, and the Republicans are starting to be optimistic. So even though the opinions on the data is anti-symmetric, they're coming to opposite conclusions, right? One's pessimistic and one's optimistic. They're still kind of agreeing on what the direction of the data is. So even if it winds up being fake data or a lie, the betrayal of those expectations will just flip people's feelings. So if Trump has this momentum going in, and at least the data is creating a mirage, let's pretend it's a mirage, the polls can't be trusted. Then when he loses, and if it's tight, the ability for his supporters to believe that shenanigans are the only explanation is going to be higher. It's going to be higher. They believe that in general from 2020, just because it's kind of hard to believe that Joe Biden got as much support as he did. But the reasons they believe there were shenanigans come down to their disbelief in the support of Joe Biden. Here, the polls are now starting to confirm their bias. And then if it manifests differently and it's close, they will believe that cheating occurred somewhere to tip it over the scale. And I don't know how that will play out. I don't expect another January 6th, but I could anticipate that the general unrest among people who were voting for Trump would be a bitter taste that they couldn't swallow and get rid of for a long time. And that might manifest itself in certain civil disobedience that I can't necessarily anticipate what it would manifest in civil disobedience wise, but I can imagine civil disobedience coming in. Like, well, we tried to put Trump in, they stole it away from us. So now we're going to disrespect all of these laws in response. We're not going to play their game anymore, is a way that I could see that playing out.
You think people just en masse quit paying their income tax?
I always hope that happens, but I don't know if it would be that strong simply because they've added a lot of IRS agents. There was a controversy earlier in the Biden administration where they were like reducing the amount that would trigger an audit, or that or reporting mechanism was like $600 transactions would then get reported up to the federal government. So depending on how backed up the IRS is and who they make an example of from an auditing and punishment standpoint,
Yeah.
you could get more people. However, it would take someone with a lot to lose, monetarily speaking, with a lot of money to signal a defiance on that standard. Because, you know, the taxes thing, a lot of lesser income people, not necessarily low income, but lesser income, we're talking not rich, middle class, lower middle class, they're not necessarily paying much in income tax anyway. Right. They're getting deductions high enough to reduce their taxable income to a low rate. So they might not have the ability, even if they did, you know, civilly disobey in that way, it wouldn't necessarily make them a target for any punishment. And the amount of money that the federal government would lose might be negligible. Mm-hmm. It would require someone like Elon Musk to go, I'm not paying this year.
Yeah.
to kind of make anything major happen in that way.
Yeah. So what's your point of view on these two candidates, like how they would actually rule? Do you think Trump will be different, better? Do you think he's learned his lesson and that he can stalk people around him that can actually make America great again, healthy again, all this stuff?
So contrary to some of the people in, let's say my political space, I'm not particularly enthusiastic about RFK Jr. I'm not particularly impressed with the idea of Elon becoming some sort of efficiency czar in the government. However, if those happen, you know, those happen. What I anticipate from that is in some parts good. It's a double-edged sword sort of situation. I don't expect him to have learned lessons when it comes to his communication from the Oval Office or from the presidency to the people. He'll communicate in similar ways. I don't know if he'll start using Twitter the same way again. If he uses Truth Social, the effects of his behavior might be lessened, because now primarily the only way that it causes controversy is when journalists copy his statements from Truth Social and post them on. So that might be different. I don't think he's learned lessons from that standpoint, though. I don't think he actually cares whether or not he makes my daily life stressful or anything like that from his rhetoric. He's just going to do that, and he's going to ask me to forgive him because of something he got rid of that I didn't like at the federal level, which maybe I can do. I don't know.
Well, really? But is that a worth? You would trade mean tweets for the abolishment of the IRS?
I generally anticipate this with I'm going to be relatively disappointed no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Some disappointments are stronger or in more important areas, but there isn't a choice for me at any given election that is, hey, that's actually stuff I really want or care or focus about. So it's going to be a mixed bag for me no matter what occurs. However, if he does keep some of his promises about certain rollbacks, continues regulation rollbacks, and if he does actually try to follow through with getting, you know, the income tax abolished, if we get a new amendment that gets rid of the federal income tax, that will definitely be something incredible that I could not actually believe will happen. That if it does happen, I'll be like, wow.
Yeah.
But outside of that, you know, I expect a lot of chaos. I'm not particularly a fan of RFK. So if RFK gets in there and starts, I don't believe that he has a discriminant mind when it comes to looking at information about medical related activities. You know, he might have some good points about shenanigans that medical companies have played, that pill manufacturers have played. Like, he might have many good points along those lines. However, he is too far. I'm going to try to make this not too deep, but surface level type of stuff. He might go too far in the way of hippie pseudo bullshit as replacements, right? Go on a tirade about anything that he calls a chemical, where everything is made up of chemicals. You know, water is a chemical, but we're going to wind up starting to talk about chemicals in the food. Okay. And we're going to dumb down from that angle our understanding of the world, because it winds up becoming rhetorically useful. And we're going to, you know, and whether or not a given ingredient in food actually has a relationship with causing harm, we're going to start to overcompensate on it causing harm, and then go, you know, start to mount these campaigns of getting rid of the chemicals in the food. Mm-hmm. Those are the types of things that concern me about his involvement.
Because they're inaccurate, or because they would lead to some sort of downstream effect like government overreach or something like that?
I don't believe his opinions are tied to the accuracy. So he'll just be an overcompensation of many things. He may very well have some very good points when it comes to the corruption, you know, the way that the drug companies buy the government and rent, to do what's called rent seeking, which is where you're basically just getting good at extracting value from the legal system versus producing a product and selling a product that people actually want. So he might have certainly valid ideas about that, and may even have good ideas about how to stop it from happening. I don't know if he does exactly, but I haven't necessarily heard them promote. I hear more paid advertisement Saturday morning talk shows talking about turmeric and all of the natural health supplements that you can take and things like that. It's a little shystery, from my point of view. So, you know, it'll be definitely a mixed bag from that angle. Now with Elon, he likes to make sure that everything he touches is sort of cross-pollinating with everything he touches. So when he gets involved, if he actually spends and dedicates time to trying to cut waste, there are absolutely, because he's also combined with Trump, going to be things that cut waste, which might be wasteful, but is now done with no discussion and no easing in for the American populace, to where the majority of the people will respond negatively to the announcement of something that is being cut. And oftentimes when you have the federal government entrenched in doing X, Y, and Z, if you immediately cut it off, X, Y, and Z might be a good thing for someone to do, and there is no one there to replace it immediately. So there's a vacuum, and then there's actual pain and consternation that occurs in the populace when that happens. So there will be excessive turbulence, I would expect, from doing stuff like that. Now, can we get through turbulence? Absolutely. But I am not personally imagining that if Trump gets in, and even if he starts to cut things in ways that, cut things I approve of, that it's going to be a smooth ride doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, that's
two other aspects of a potential Trump, effective Trump administration. Immigration, mass deportations. This is a sticking point for my mom. My sister-in-law immigrated from Brazil, married my brother, went through the whole legal process of, becoming a citizen. My mom's really concerned that indiscriminate rounding up and deportation of illegals will have spillover effects. It's a massive thing. And plus, my mom and women, from her point of view, really are concerned with a rise of racial profiling and racism and stuff. What do you think that situation will actually be like? And also, after answering that, internationally, what do you think the effect of Trump will be?
So, with deportations, so the situation is often presented sort of as a strict dichotomy. And so we have, let's just take the Biden administration right now. The general consensus is they really abdicated their responsibility to control illegal immigration at the southern border. And lots of undocumented workers, as they like to call them, have come into the United States. They also changed some of the executive ways of handling migrants, so that was the Springfield, Ohio controversy with the Haitians, right? They are given a legal status, but it wasn't the sort of standard way that people imagine legal immigration, where you're actually going through all these forms and processes. It was a sort of it was an asylum sort of procedure. There was chaos in Haiti, so they sort of evacuated people, and then they sent them here, and then they just started hand waving away any sorts of legal problems, saying, okay, you're here legally, you're here legally, you're here legally, and then they just keep renewing that and pushing the legality of their stay a lot longer. But it wasn't the sort of, you come in, you take the immigration test, you become a naturalized, or not naturalized, but you become a citizen, and you actually participate in our civic process and things like that. It's just, here's some people, they're fine, from just hand waving some legal forms away. So people are increasingly, like, it actually was something that Kamala has been pushed on several times by otherwise friendly fire interviewers. So when that happens, you can kind of tell that the sentiments on the ground are actually pivoting that way. The problem can't be just pushed aside necessarily. And so it becomes a dichotomy that you either just stop this and get rid of everybody because they weren't supposed to be here to begin with, and that's all that you have to do. And then the proposal from the Democrats is that, oh, okay, well, we're going to get, we can't just round up people and kick them out, and we're going to give them a path to citizenship. But both of those proposals ignore a longer issue, which is that the current actual immigration, the legitimate path to immigration, is not attainable for most people who would possibly like to come and go through a normal process to become a United States citizen. You wind up having a lot of, again, rent seeking is the term I want to use, because it's people trying to game the legal system for their own benefit. You have a lot of these A1B visa talks where it's like, oh, well, we just want the workers, right? So you have a whole bunch of people with economic interests trying to get their hands in the immigration game. So now we're not talking about the standard idea of people from one country wanting to actually come to the United States as citizens to live out what we call the American dream. They don't like their system of government. They love the story that we have of our founding fathers. They really appreciate it, and they want to come and they want to become American citizens, and they go through a regular legal process. We don't have that. By and large, that process is very, very complicated. So we wind up doing these other things that allow people to try to extract talented labor from certain locations through visa processes and all these things that aren't actual immigration things. So that's the thing that we talk on and focus most, and we just start to control the levers as well. This needs to be opened up. This needs to be shut down, and that ignores the real type of immigration that we're talking about. Now, when you have too high of a threshold for people to actually legitimately come in, individual people, I don't know if anyone's noticed this, tend to be focused on their own interests above other considerations. And so you do wind up with a force that allows the illegal immigration to become more desirable for those people, because it's actually, they spend lots of money bribing people to get in. There's a huge business in getting people in illegally. The degree to which the real system's broken can be kind of measured in the amount of money that people will spend to do it illegally. It's not a generic, by and large, it's not a generic disrespect for laws in America's legal system that says to people, I'm going to spend money when I don't have to sneak in illegally. No one's making that decision primarily. Of course, criminals might, but, otherwise fine people are not making the decision that they're going to incur a cost to do it illegally just to spite the United States. They would go through a legal process if that was somehow a thing they could do that didn't take 15 years and tens of thousands of dollars and legal fees and all sorts of complexities and hurdles to go through with all sorts of eligibility tests. Now, of course, having standards isn't necessarily a problem, but having too stringent of standards or a insanely complex legal system to navigate through in order to accomplish it is just too burdensome. And we don't focus on that pretty much at all because we set up this dichotomous sort of situation. And so there's my there's my feeling on that. Now, if Trump wins, when it comes to actually physically rounding up people, there could be a process of that which would not become the hellhole that people might worry about. And that is, there is some record of who these people are and where they were placed through their triage process. Because if you declare asylum, I guess you're given some court hearings and then you're sent on your way and say, this is when your court date is. There's talk of that system being backed up. So their court dates are 6 months to a year to 2 years to 3 years out. So it's hypothetically, there are records of some of these people and where they might be. Of course, not perfect records. Now, if you start from that sort of chain and you actually find people because you have records of them, it wouldn't be indiscriminate and there wouldn't be any necessary concern about who's getting, quote, rounded up and kicked out. That being said, once a process happens and there is a negative reaction towards it, which of course there will be, it will be skewed as inhumane no matter how it starts. Then you have people who are supportive of it, who are going to combat it rhetorically. And that type of tension back and forth might create a situation where the general malaise that arguing about politics creates in people might make the supporters of such a process less tolerant of people they've now identified themselves as not deserving of being here if those people cross them. If someone that fits a stereotype of someone they would imagine being deported, and that person is rude to them or does something they don't like, they certainly might lash out. So those are real things that will happen probably, and valid concerns to have. And I think anyone who downplays that might happen kind of forgets human nature a little bit. But I don't necessarily think, just based on the way that Trump tends to overblow his rhetoric in the first place, I don't think that the policy he would implement would be as cold and cruel as people could imagine the worst being. So there's my kind of, it's complex, but my attempt at separating the concerns.
And internationally, you think the world would be better off? Or at least our relation to the world?
Well,
and what would you like?
Refine that one. Give me a direction to go on that one. What would I like?
Yeah, America's role in the international stage. What do you think is the proper place at this point in history?
I mean, generically, I would say I would like less foreign involvement. I less meddling in other people's affairs. We have a long-standing idea that the role of the United States is to export our beliefs, even though our beliefs change over time. That's our role, and we have it's always the federal government's business to. So we have this idea that if it's in our interest, that we should be pushing for it. And so whether or not something feels like it's in our interest sort of becomes the arbiter of whether or not we get involved. So right now, not to get too deep into that situation, but right yesterday, Israel started to attack Iran in response to Iran attacking Israel several weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now, it's easy to say that some outcome in there is in our interest. Who depending on who you talk to, the outcome that becomes in our interest changes. But the phrase "it's in our interest" is the way that people wiggle in their type of intervention, what they want to happen. Yeah. And I tend to have a much more standoffish. It's not in our interest to actually assert ourselves and get involved in particular events. Now, maybe on any individual one, I might be persuaded to say, okay, I understand that we need to get involved there, or our involvement should be involved, this much, but limited to this. But by and large, just average it out over time, we're involved in too many things. It should be, not getting ourselves involved. The sort of negotiation we do on the world scale is really sort of a loose hegemony that is controlled by very, very powerful, influential people. And I believe by and large, that project is not serving, quote, our interests. And we should start to abandon some of that.
Yeah. Do you think Trump would be able to pivot in that direction? Do you think that's what he's going to end up doing or not?
He's sort of a mix. He likes to declare what we want publicly, loudly, and then not necessarily push to start to get ourselves involved in micromanaging other places. Mm-hmm. But he's definitely has been convinced in the past by military to either continue engagement in places where our involvement might not be clear to everyone. Conflicts in Syria for the last half decade at least, if not longer. I think Syria we started getting involved during the Obama administration, so it's been like a decade, and we do things in Syria. There's conflicts, there's skirmishes, we're involved somehow, but what we're there for is not in everyone's mind. It's not there. And Trump had many Syrian activities. There were definitely conflicts that he would have been responsible for dictating or directing or agreeing to. So he's definitely capable of being influenced by what they call the military industrial complex in some way, where what the considerations of what his decision-making process is aren't clear. Not that they're necessarily clearer with any other president, but they're not clear, so I can't predict what interventions he might be engaging in or continuing because he hasn't figured out how to. I mean, we didn't get out of Iraq during his period, even though he did start to set up the. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Afghanistan. Yeah. I misspoke. We didn't get out of Afghanistan during his time period, even though he started to set up things. Yeah. Now, in an alternate universe, I'm not sure the date that he would have he set to get out that the Biden administration eventually pulled out on would have been kept. I don't know. So that's too difficult for me to predict any particular way he would go because he can be convinced and influenced in various ways. Now he has shown a lot of examples of pulling out of agreements that people dislike, so that I would expect him to pull out of more things, but I don't know what he might initiate or agree to that involves large multinational cooperation.
Well, I guess to make it really dumbed down, do you think America would be safer internationally under a Trump administration as opposed to a Biden-Harris administration?
I'm not sure that we have been unsafe, depending on what you mean by that, for a very, very long time. There's always lingering threats to us. And when I mean us, I mean the continental United States, or Hawaii and Alaska included. Our actual physical safety has been strong for many, many, many years. 9/11 notwithstanding, there's no wars that are brought to our homeland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So from that standpoint, I don't expect necessarily any war to break out in the next 4 years on the United States territory. Now, if you broaden the question to safety being a global question and whether international conflicts would increase or decrease, depending on who wins, I could see Kamala continuing pretty much exactly the way that we are headed currently. I don't believe that she has any ideas on foreign policy or military conflicts that would deviate from the horde, the hive mind that exists in those current systems. The federal government, Trump notwithstanding, is very much on rails. If you go back in time to earlier elections when it wasn't this insane, people generally felt that who got elected president wouldn't matter when it came to the foreign policy part, by and large, that the system would feed the president's information about the threat assessments, and that the decisions that would be made would be made almost identically no matter who was president, because they were all going to receive the same information, and the solutions to the information they were receiving, or problems they were receiving through the information, was going to be sort of pigeonholed into just these obvious things. And so therefore they're all going to, by and large, be identical. Now, Trump throws a cog in that because he'll threaten Iran in the middle of the night, 3:00 in the morning, and say, don't you dare attack us here or you'll be obliterated. Like he's absolutely nuts when it comes to that. I'm not saying that increases our danger. Rhetoric being thrown around doesn't necessarily mean that a country is going to risk their own demolition or go to war because Trump tweeted in the middle of the night. These personal insults, people like to pretend that, Trump saying the wrong personal insult to some country is going to cause them to go to full out war.
Yeah.
Really
or necessarily
risk.
cause them to back off their direction. Would you say?
No, that backing off a direction is much, because that you're talking about people making the decision to risk enormous losses. Okay. When there is no breaking even when you start going into a conflict. Okay. You're going to incur losses if you go into armed conflict. And so what I was just saying is him threatening Iran on Twitter saying, we'll demolish you, does not encourage Iran to say, okay, we're going to incur these heavy losses and attack you because you insulted us. Mm-hmm. However, if they might be planning some sort of attack, not necessarily, obliterated us attack, but some assault, and they get a threat, it might increase their perception of how believable and the magnitude of a response would be. Mm-hmm. So just by and large, if they don't believe there's going to be a response, the attack is costless. They do the attack, they make a public display, they back off, their attack's done, they win something locally to say, hey, we're a strong country, and it doesn't escalate to full-blown war. If they make the assessment either that that's just like a subtle mutual agreement between the leaders, like, okay, we understand you're going to do this attack for show, we're not going to go to full-blown war, we won't do anything in response, and we'll just laugh at you, and that'll be the agreement we have. You can show face to your people, we'll show face to our people, and we'll back off. But if Trump convinces them, that he's crazy, he's got the twitchy eye, and he's got his finger on the trigger, they might not engage in that sort of show attack because they understand that if they do, the consequences will be high. So that absolutely can stop people from acting. I'm just saying on the opposite end, to encourage them to act, the shit talking and the Twitter posting and the bloviating, it doesn't. And just like take the North Korea as the example version, I've got a bigger red button and mine works. And he called him Little Rocket Man in front of the UN.
Yeah.
I mean, these hilarious things that are just completely bizarre in a modern context when it comes to diplomats and heads of state. But they're not going to make Kim Jong-un, or Il, rather. No, Un. We're in Un. Sorry. My timelines are getting, but we're not going to get Un going and saying, okay, now it's time for me to risk my entire country because this goofball, said something mean to me. I mean, his people inside are confined to their own propaganda. They don't get outside propaganda as free flowing. Now, of course, some stuff leaks in, but they don't get it, free flowing like we do. So, it's not as much of an embarrassment. He's not sitting there going, oh man, I really am losing the people whenever something like that happens. So it's just, I don't think it's as big of a threat to our safety, either one of them necessarily. Now, of course, the only thing that is really going to change that could be whether or not China ever does make a move on Taiwan, or Russia decides that their conflict in the Ukraine is threatening their own country's entire survival, and therefore they need to get desperate or they lose. It's either lose or do a Hail Mary sort of situation. Mm-hmm. Those are the only two things I can foresee. And of course, there may be more that I'm ignorant of, but.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Before we flip, and thank you very much for letting me hear your thoughts on these. It's really enlightening for me. And expansive to my understanding. Why do you think Trump picked Vance, and what's your opinion of the guy? What's his usefulness or lack thereof?
I'm not minding Vance from the role he's currently playing. That's not an endorsement of the man. That's not me saying that I like him in his political opinions broadly. But from sort of the way things are playing out on the presidential competition stage, he's well-spoken. He's obviously very articulate and can navigate a rhetorical proposition very well. So he's the type of person who can argue any position that he is handed convincingly. Now, that doesn't help you if you're trying to figure out whether or not you actually wind up agreeing with him, because you know that he can actually levy a coherent and intelligent argument from any position. That makes him a very good choice, because it is a stark contrast, particularly because he is not coming from a extreme religious standpoint. He's sort of like a milk toast religious person, right? He seems like he has some religious convictions, but they're not Mike Pence level, right? They don't evoke strong Handmaid's Tale imagery that can be exploited by Alyssa Milano for photo ops. He's made some interesting comments about, cat ladies and things like that, but nothing that comes out the same way that Mike Pence does. And so from that level, he seems, him being a younger generation, unlike a 60-year-old to an 80-year-old, he's able to sort of give an idea that Trump is a bulldozer going to open things up, and that an actual younger generation of conservatives will take over after that. So he's able to give people by choosing Vance a forward-looking future that actually sounds coherent. Seems logical, and I just mean seems logical, not to say he's illogical, but his presentation, again, he can take any position and argue for it in a persuasive and convincing way, gives it a logical framework that people feel is legitimate. So it does create like a really nice contrast to what you have on the opposite side, where Walz, in some ways, was a initially understandable good pick. His relaxed demeanor and the way that he comes off as just being your neighbor. That's literally how he kind of sold himself. That does work. He seems folksy. He does have that sort of appeal, but he definitely had nowhere to go from there. And so he didn't have any strong ability to present arguments in any way whatsoever. I haven't heard him actually persuasively argue any position point. The only thing he figured out how to say is mind your business, which obviously has its own obvious hypocrisy and contradictions that are plain as day when you look at how he handled his own state when it came to COVID. And people are still really burned about COVID, understandably. So that does not play well when his prime rhetoric is a hypocritical one. Yeah. But Vance seems like a strong pick for those reasons. I just don't know. I don't know if I sit there and I go, this is a guy I intellectually agree with, and his concept of a civil society equals mine. So I don't know. I don't know if he got into the president, let's say, just pretending to shoot forward. Trump gets in and 4 years, it's Vance now running for president, having just been vice president. I don't know if the policies he would enact when he gets in there just go back to 2000 era or 1990s era politics or not. I can't see. I can't.
Is that what you want? Is that your ideal? I mean,
no.
There's nothing embarrassing about saying you do dream of the 90s.
No. I miss some of the cartoons, but I'm not necessarily gung ho about the level of politics. No, I would much rather a large dismantling of the federal apparatus. So if we get that and then he becomes president, that'll be interesting to see. But I don't. As long as the federal apparatus is large, any particular president is going to be able to control levers that I don't like.
So Kamala. Or Kamala, sorry, I'm not sorry. I always forget, and I'm not supposed to. So, Harris, is there any there? Is she just going to be kind of a mask on top of the cherry pie of the United States government? And
she's totally possible.
What directions will it go?
No, I expect it to be a large continuation of the Biden administration. I mean, obviously, there will be some policy differences. She's going to have ideas in her head about what she wants to do. But on the average situation, she's not going to have a clue. She's not going to have an understanding. And so therefore she's going to be taking the information of everyone that she's appointed to give her advice on something. And so by and large, that's what Biden does. And so you're going to wind up with a very similar situation. Now, there will be, of course, some things she wants to push, agendas she wants to push as the front of her presidency, the ones that we might remember because there were, the news talked about it a lot. Okay, so I'm talking about the average thing, right? The things that we don't pay attention to on any given day, not the stuff we talk about the most, the stuff we don't pay attention to, that will by and large be the same as Biden.
Yeah.
She's not, I don't know if I've heard a single thing from her that lets me know whether she actually has any strong beliefs or whether she just believes that once someone gets in there, they get to do some stuff they think is good at the time. It doesn't seem to me that she has an actual concept of the role of government. So it's not like she comes in there either with opinions I like, which is reduced federal intervention and reducing the administrative state, or whether she actually is sort of wants to increase the administrative state. I would assume that she wants to increase the administrative state, but I don't know if it's her philosophy, right? She might wind up doing it just because she's more in the moment trying to solve whatever things in front of her and think about what to do. And it might just always tend to be more federal involvement. But I don't know if she has some sort of grandiose political philosophy. There are some presidents who have actual, I want to change these things about the government in order to make the government function exactly this way because I believe that the proper form of government or the proper way that it should be organized is this way. I don't get that sense from her. But she has such a small trail of actual thought to go back to that I wouldn't have the possibility even if she did have those.
Do you think that she would just be a fourth Obama term?
No, Obama had a concept. He had concepts.
By that I mean, do you think that Obama's power, I mean, he still lives in D.C., right? He's still controlling something. He still has influence. Do you think that it will extend to Kamala? Or do you think that it extended to Biden?
I'm not sure who is currently exerting the most influence from the outside. I believe Obama took a considerable portion of influence away from the Clintons to that, the Clintons no longer they're not the godfather of the Democratic Party anymore. And Obama could be far more consolidated in his power behind the scenes and for the Democratic apparatus than the Clintons could be. And so I don't know to that degree how much Barack even likes Kamala. I don't think he particularly was fond of Biden, to where, they're two of the same minds operating towards the same goals. I think he was very pragmatic in the choice of Biden, and Biden, I don't think he necessarily chose Kamala for Biden as a vice president. So I don't know if Kamala gets in, whether Barack Obama will have to exert pressure or if he'll already have sort of the power to influence decisions. Kamala does strike me as the type who would not want someone else to necessarily push her around.
Yeah. It's really interesting having this discussion because I haven't actually tried to visualize her as the president. My mind just runs away from that thought.
Well, we can already tell it'll be similar in one aspect to the Biden administration. Absolutely. And that is you can watch her campaign and see that she adopted all of the same sort of hide away and just repeat the talking point strategy that Biden implemented during his campaign. Yeah,
she'll have
literally shoved him in a basement and just had him do a bunch of Zoom calls over and over again. Now, Biden had the tendency to also say stuff off the cuff that got him in trouble. She's much more controlled, but they still are enacting like the same sort of strategy where it's just rehearse the message. And that's all she's doing. So she's definitely adopting the larger apparatus that Biden had. So from that standpoint, that's one reason to expect her to be very, very similar to Biden.
I can't see her, and this is one Trump talking point, but I can't see her actually having the ability to negotiate with outside actors like a Putin or
just imagine how Venn diagrams could help her figure that out, because she's a big fan of Venn diagrams. She is a nerd like that.
Did you hear the cocaine allegations?
No, I don't think I did.
The cocaine that was found in the White House
ago
was actually from her, or was left there by one of her staff for her, or whatever.
No, I would put my money on it being Hunter. I mean, However, that was actually, just to quickly tangent to that was one of the funnier moments of the Biden administration, right? So you have the guy that you absolutely know has a coke problem. He's in the White House and visiting at the time you find the coke. And the Secret Service thought that it was better to say it could have been anyone's. That's their response. Well, it's definitely not Hunter Biden's, because it could have, it could have been anybody. Anybody could have been the one bringing coke into the White House.
Yeah.
And I don't think they recognize that's actually worse.
Do you think that it's like a doomsday scenario for either of these political candidates to get into the presidential office?
So doomsday, no, things will
lumber along.
Right. If Trump gets in, unless he controls everything, both chambers of the House, Representatives and the Senate, and just has smooth sailing on all sort of his things, he's going to get opposition. He's going to be stalled in the legislative branch, and we know that the media is going to just relentlessly hammer on everything he does. So he will still have lots of friction, which will make things move slowly, unless he's just starting to do things by executive order and getting rid of things. Now, with Kamala, it'll also be slow, but it'll also be insidious. And the things that like I said, she's going to be the same as Biden. So like I also said about Twitter and Elon and these things, they will focus on that disinformation, and they will try to work their machinations with the social media companies in the background. Yeah. And they may learn some things about how to hide it better, about what levers they can pull, more subtly, that'll take much more effort to untangle. And they will update that campaign. Absolutely. They will increase the effort to make that control stronger, which does strongly concern me. In fact, I've been focused on it myself in the sense of thinking of how I will react and, manage myself going forward.
Really?
Yeah. I can't get into too much of that. I have some projects that I'm working on that are at the moment things I'm not
Well, yeah, but tools that people can use, like a VPN, a brand new VPN. And do you need me to? I could become your shill. I need the ad money, so I could broadcast.
No, at some point I might talk about it, or I'll just release it, and I won't claim responsibility, sort of like Bitcoin or something.
But it's basically to facilitate somebody's.
I'm just thinking of what my role will be. I'm just thinking of what my role will be going forward. Instead, if I'm not, I don't want to be particularly passive. I want to actually do things like, I have a network of people who I can talk to at different times, whose access to other people or reach in social media spaces are larger than mine. And
so this sounds like your issue.
What do you mean?
This sounds like, well, it's something you want to do something about. So there's something, this is like your thing. And what is it? Like, what is your biggest concern?
Well, my biggest concern is that through trying to control the social media space, they will also control the absolute information space. They will control the news that you're allowed to read, and they will control the news that you are allowed to absorb. And they will prevent you from exploring any information that might force you to come to an opposite conclusion of their goals. I mean, we saw them attempt to do that. COVID is one of the best. We are fortunate for the sort of, in some ways, for the tyranny that we experienced during COVID, because it lifted the veil and removed forever the pretense that couldn't happen here.
Yeah.
Okay? It made it self-evident for people who weren't already thinking about that to now see that they were suppressing valid information about anything involving COVID if it went against the official narratives.
Which was changing every 2 weeks anyway.
It was changing every 2 weeks, but they are afforded the luxury because the data changes underneath.
Wow.
Right? Oh, well, the information changed. These people aren't just going to make shit up. Well, of course they are going to make shit up.
There's something admirable about the level of tyranny that they were able to pull off.
It is what I call like, beautiful artwork from the worst artist you've ever seen, like the worst human being making the most beautiful art. And that is what it is. And I can't admire it for the level of, psychopathy that is required to be so despotic. Of course, I am absolutely against that sort of despotism, but, it is the degree to which they were committed to that project. It will absolutely be amplified.
One of the things that they were able to accomplish was to weaponize neuroticism and to have the populace eat itself or control itself by
every other human
dialing in on
being.
that.
Every other human being could potentially kill you by their very existence and proximity to you. You do not get more fear-mongering than that.
Yeah.
Okay. You have social distance.
Unless you're fighting for racial justice. Okay. Let's just put that out there.
Well, some of them were wearing masks when they were protesting.
Yeah. It's called Black Bloc, but yeah, sure. It stops the virus.
No, you're absolutely correct. There is a sort of impressive nature in something that you can admire in the sense of looking at a complex object and looking at its construction, right? A gun can be a very deadly thing, but you can admire the construction of a gun. A conspiracy to kill an important person, to assassinate the president, is a bad thing, but the complexity and the level of intricacy of that plot can be admired as a complex item of human creation, right? From a not to admire the outcomes, but just to admire the construction. And from that standpoint, I mean, it's a very, very clever way that they sort of ingrained it. And actually, I believe in one of our previous podcasts, I mentioned how they go about this, which is that they start to say that the government has the freedom to express its own opinions. So when the government is expressing its opinions to these companies in the back channel, the fact that there is no explicit pressure in any given message, any explicit quid pro quo, or sort of you will be punished if you don't listen to our request here, they get to say, oh, we are exhibiting our free speech. Right. And they get to say it's just opinions. Hey, look, he worked for the federal government. He's entitled to his opinion, too. So that's one person expressing an opinion to another person. And that's how they kind of start to wiggle it in, where most conversations are not direct. They're not the types of you will do this or else conversations, because that's implicit in the transaction by and large. And so they will amplify that. You will have communications. They love to do this, which is they suggest terms of service that should be enacted. And then they have the terms of service, and then they go, hey, we noticed that this person who is our political enemy violated this terms of service that you have here. Would you please take care of that? And therefore, on the surface level, when you look at that instance in isolation, it seems legitimate. The company had a terms of service. Users are supposed to adhere to the terms of service. The government just noticed that someone violated the terms of service and sent a message. It's really so innocent. There's really nothing you can complain about. Just kick that up a whole bunch, kick that up several notches. And, obviously, if the Republicans maintain the legislative branch, Kamala won't have the full ability. The Democratic administration won't have the full latitude to do that without scrutiny. But scrutiny sometimes doesn't matter. Scrutiny doesn't matter sometimes, right? Yeah. Like how many investigations will the Republicans have to throw together while they're still doing it?
Yeah. Do you think
how long does it take to get a case to the Supreme Court?
I don't want to assume your political agenda, but it seems like you're in opposition to the administrative state insofar as you want it reduced, and you are worried about different ways that it gains and maintains and sustains power. Would a Kamala so we go back to COVID. it was terrible, but it woke a lot of people up, and
Right.
I think it put a lot of people on the right track and allowed for a lot of consideration of assumptions or priors. Could there be a positive effect for the opposition to the administrative state through a Kamala administration? 4 years. I don't think she'd do
sometimes you look at that and you say, okay, let me give you a practical example from regular politics. Republicans typically complain about the deficit whenever a Democrat is in office in the presidency. The Republicans typically are talking about, the deficit's too high, the deficit's too high, the deficit's too high. And that could have an effect on forcing the Democrats' hand to restrain the budget a little bit. Obviously not a lot. We still wind up going deeper into a debt, but it could restrain them from what they might have done otherwise. Let's just leave that as a possibility. But when the Republicans get in, now all of a sudden it's a spending spree and the deficit still increases, and it's, a sort of a hypocrisy. Now, of course, leveraging hypocrisy in that sort of way where, we spend less because the Democrats won the presidency and the Republicans are the ones who are critical of the spending at that time when it's convenient for them. Sure, that could play out in some way where if Kamala wins, it will restrain some things or make people pay attention to situations they might have otherwise ignored. Absolutely, I could grant you that that sort of thing can happen. The problem is that we've now had the Biden administration for 4 years, and if we follow it up with yet another one with the same types of plans for control, I mean, just look at how many times now they've tried to do the school loan forgiveness plan that continues to be rejected by the courts. They lose every single time and they just try a new way. So if you imagine that that's going to be what the Harris administration does, by the end of the Harris administration, no matter what people may have been awakened to, certain things might be eroded to a degree where getting them back is now sort of impossible, because we also have to consider every new generation coming into politics is going to assume that the way that we've done things for the last 30 years is just the way things are. Okay, so there's going to be a status quo of some sorts of despotism and machinations from the federal government that is just the way things operate. Mm-hmm. And so depending on how those things are promoted or linguistically controlled, getting rid of them becomes almost impossible. Particularly because now the incoming younger generations, just this is the way things are. There's they're not objecting to new trends that usurp more power at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of switching gears a little bit, you're part of the opposition, and it sounds like you're saying Kamala will just allow, or that administration will just continue in the direction that you don't want to go, and Trump probably won't, and might actually go in a direction.
He might do some things that I approve of in concept. They'll probably be executed very clumsily, and it'll be chaotic. But after some settling, I might like some of the destination more. I don't think he's going to do everything I would like, so I'm not imagining he's going to, quote, save us. But I could imagine, I could foresee some things that he does that I approve of. Absolutely.
Are there enemies that you're kind of on the side of right now, but that are actually your enemies, like this, in the right? It doesn't sound like you're right that much, but maybe you are. Maybe you identify that. But
you mean correct or on the right side of politics?
Exactly. You're more aimed at being correct and stuff. But to what degree is there a rising tide of fascism, or some sort of derivative that you are perturbed by or actually worried by from the opposition party? The DR, et cetera. It said the dissident right guys.
Oh, okay.
Or the Groypers, which I don't take seriously, but maybe you do. Maybe.
I'm not worried. Is not necessarily the word I would use to describe my feelings. I think by and large, it's a collection of silly and unserious people who are engaged in their own sort of social entertainment
Are you talking about the dissident right in general? And maybe I can come up with
So
a better
let's
word
just
for
talk
you.
about Groyper.
Or
Let's say
just
Groypers.
Groypers. Okay.
Let's say Groypers to start with. Okay. So they're unserious people who don't really have anything important to say, even though they do sometimes find an undercurrent sentiment that latches on to other people. Okay.
Okay.
There are groups of people who are bringing up old sorts of arguments and old sorts of battles, trying to bring back discussions that have by and large gone the way of the dodo, so to speak, in modern politics. And they are often doing so in a very agitating way. They are attempting to purposely be provocative.
Yeah.
And of course, it would be hard to determine any one of those characters' individual true beliefs when they are purposely being provocative. There are some of them where it may truly be that they are not the caricatures they themselves are portraying, displaying to the world, but it is difficult to determine which sets of them are truly malignant actors attempting to take people on a ride. Because here's the main concern that does happen, and this is not unique to the right. This happens in all sorts of social circles. So if any of you dissident right people are upset, listen, it happens to everyone. But we saw the focus primarily being brought attention to actually in the 2015, 2016 era, when the broad corporate media was going off of the right-wing influences on YouTube. If you recall, the New York Times had this one quote expose where they kind of said that Tim Pool was on the alt-right, and Ben Shapiro, like they put all these YouTube videos that were popular on YouTube.
Yeah, the pipeline, that alt-right pipeline.
There you go. Okay,
yeah.
So obviously what they were hyping up was simply partisan bullshit. Anything that was, countering the Dems was grouped into that component. That being said, the pipeline idea is not completely without merit when you look at individual cases. So there are people who are propagandists by nature. Okay, whether they are learned propagandists, meaning they studied it and tried to understand how things work mechanistically from an academic standpoint, or they just are kind of sociopaths to do it because it's what their normal nature is. But what they do is they wind up creating an information space, and they take people on an information journey that leads them to a predestined conclusion. Okay, so without naming anybody to start some sort of shit fight on the internet, you can imagine a group of people who are currently talking about things that are socially taboo. And maybe it is with respect to Israel versus Palestine, where now they are critiquing the Jews in a way that tends to get the accusation of anti-Semitic. But if you look into it, you can say, oh, well, this person isn't actually anti-Semitic. Maybe they just articulated this one thing, or their focus just seems off to you because you're not actually paying attention to the scenario. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so they start from that premise that they are just levying real concerns. And then they gain their user base by talking about things that are currently taboo, but in a way that is acceptable. And then over time, that character that they are presenting goes through a transition where they didn't start off Adolf Hitler-like. But they've taken you through an information spectrum, reacting to certain things and presenting you with certain details that now the way that the culture is, I wasn't like this before, but now I'm certainly for fascism. Oh man, it's time. We actually have to separate the races or something, insane like that, right? Where by modern standards, it's insane to have the idea that we're going to start segregating society. But, you throw enough crime that shows, African Americans committing it with general disdain for civic law. And then the people who you inundate with that day in, day out could be convinced that, hey, listen, it's just easier. Of course, not every African American is going to commit crimes, but it's just such a high prevalence. Let's just separate the societies and be done with it. Quote, they don't even want to be here anyway. Right. They were brought here against their will to begin with. A certain, sort of disgusting rhetoric that can be thrown once you've preached an information saturation. Now, knowing which of those characters in advance is the one who's actually attempting to take people on a ride like that is difficult, right? It requires you to supposedly know the spirit and the nature of the person. And if anyone listening to this is of that type of, possibly on that track now, and you think that that's ridiculous, you also believe that the FBI does this to loners, causing them to be, mass shooters, enticing them to become a terrorist, right? We have, if you don't believe that these phenomenons can occur, you do believe they occur because you believe they occur with the FBI or other, the CIA, where they take people who are vulnerable to certain information, loners or lack of social cohesion, and they give them a social network to be a part of, and they are grooming them to become a weapon of some sorts, right? Mm-hmm. And so the same thing occurs, and separating who is just discussing facts and just discussing honest perspectives that they think are under discussed is difficult to separate on a level from who the actors are who are nefarious, who have either their own self-interested ulterior motives or literally are trying to convert you into a different type of political persuasion that we might say is deleterious.
Is there a centrist version of this?
Centrism is not fully defined enough to have one of those versions. The best you can get there is, let's say, more hands-off libertarian approach. That's the best you can get there. And of course, you can take someone to that on that journey by constantly showing situations where the government has taken power and done awful things with it.
Yeah. It's just, I see classical liberals trying to gatekeep, and it seems like they're doing the same thing that the radicals are doing with inundating people with a negative point of view. But maybe they're right, maybe they're right about radicalization on the right or radicalization on the left, and they want to, but it just seems like if you don't do it correctly, you're policing discourse and you're not actually going in the direction of libertarianism. Well, so I kind of retract my trust in people who back away from libertarianism. But, maybe they do have a point when they critique these things as going off the rails or perhaps potentially being fascist.
Let's try to narrow down what policing the discourse is. Yeah. Okay. From my standpoint, policing the discourse is when you begin to tell your friends who they can and can't associate with and who they should and shouldn't listen to.
Yeah.
As the information flows go on. It is not criticizing an individual as being a bad actor. Criticizing a person as being a bad actor is something we do all the time.
Yeah.
Now, people can certainly jump to criticizing a person's character without knowing them in a way too premature way. And we can delve into that one particular topic of the recent version of that incarnation if you want to, but it's not necessarily something I'm driven by.
Yeah. No.
But
just the pattern.
If someone is using phrases that seem, like they're problematic, to use the older left term, right? And you're trying to make an assessment whether that person is the bad actor or not. Some people might just assume they're all bad actors because they're using these phrases in a certain way. And therefore, they might jump to the conclusion that that is one of the bad actors prematurely. I don't think that that's policing the discourse, provided that you are also not going around and starting to put pressure on everyone to stop listening to that person. If you go on an active campaign and say, like, oh, you shouldn't be listening to this person as like a hard thing.
Yeah.
Then that starts to be policing the discourse, because now you're actually going on patrol and you're actually starting to tell people what they should and should not do with their information flows. Because I'm not aware of how anyone learns about something without actually studying it. So even if a person is one of those bad actors, not listening to them means that you're now ignorant of all the things that they are doing.
Yeah.
Right? You're not able to come to the conclusion they are a bad actor, and you're not able to then...
Or where they went wrong even.
Maybe where they went wrong. Yeah. Absolutely. Right? And so that would be, to me, where the policing the discourse actually comes in, when you start to tell people who they can and can't listen to. Not that they shouldn't. Making an argument why people shouldn't pay attention to a particular character because they are a nefarious actor is only attempted at warning them not to go down that ride that has a predetermined destination that you're going to go on, right? But it's not necessarily policing unless they start to put pressure on you where I won't talk to you if I know that you're listening to that guy, right? Putting consequences on it. Criticizing is criticizing. That's where I'm delineating policing the discourse. I think a lot of people responded to policing the discourse because it was critical from a standpoint of this is a bad guy who you probably shouldn't listen to. But you know, it's understandable because a lot of information.
Me listen harder. That's just my my gut reaction to it. What is your group, your clan, your tribe? What would you describe that as? Are you a lone gun?
I'm pretty much a lone gun. I'm going to disagree with people in my circle on a lot of issues. I just don't necessarily feel it vital to delve into it because the world is going to unfold.
Like in reality, you're kind of a tech bro libertarian type. Is that like what's your type?
Last time we talked, I described myself as sort of a anarcho-capitalist who understands that will never be the reality, so I don't even bother. Yeah, and I just sort of I just sort of nudge my things as they come to my into my view. Like I don't proselytize. I don't, you know, the stereotypic anarcho-capitalist people, they'll start talking about Murray Rothbard or you know, they'll start trying to promote all their favorite, you know, libertarian anarchist writers or something like that. And I don't bother because it's just not, it's not one, how I want to spend my life is trying to promote other people's thoughts and works, even if I like some of their thoughts. You know, I'm a huge Thomas Sowell fan, but I don't spend majority of my days promoting Thomas memes. Sowell. Yeah. Right. And that's just not how I orient myself. So I'm broadly speaking, you can just say I'm like an anarcho-capitalist who doesn't ever expect it to happen. So I don't bother.
Do you think there's a cultural issue underlying our political issue that you're concerned with? Like a hot button topic, you know, that there's just like, you know, if we could get this cleaned up in our society, maybe things would be better. And maybe
oddly enough, there is possibly one thing I can think of that might actually change things in significant ways. That actually somewhat is tangential to a very short interaction we had the other day where you had asked about FDR and I said, you know, Woodrow Wilson was worse. Yeah. You know, that FDR might have been a bad guy, but Woodrow Wilson was worse. And that is actually, I'll get straight to the point there. That is some of the changes in the progressive era of the early 1900s that modified the way the federal government actually even functioned, that have contributed, in my opinion, the most to creating some of the modern problems we have, both socially and politically, because to the degree that they're intertwined. Mm-hmm. The 17th Amendment of the Constitution fundamentally changed the nature of the federal government in a way that makes despotism and its totalitarian nature a given destination. It makes it almost deterministic. When you take a civics class in high school, let's say, you're introduced to the founding fathers and you're told that they created a system of government that is comprised of checks and balances. And you're told about the three co-equal branches. You're told about the legislative, the judiciary, and the executive. And you're given some, you know, details of how they interact and how they operate control over one another so that none of them comes out on top. And then you're told that you have a bicameral legislative, that you have two houses. And if you're in the modern context, and if they don't give you a complete historical history, a discussion of how things changed over time and why and what the arguments were for certain proposals, you might just wind up wondering why we have two branches or two chambers of the legislature. And the way that we operate right now, the Senate, they're kind of just super representatives, right? We have fewer of them per state. Instead of being elected by district, we vote on them across the entire state. They serve longer terms. They perform a couple different functions than the House of Representatives, but by and large, they're just super representatives, right? They just represent more people. Okay, so all you're really doing is averaging out the decisions of the same people who elected the House of Representatives. And that was actually the 17th Amendment that brought in that change. And that change, along with other behaviors with respect to voting, have caused us to expect as a population that the only way that makes sense to have an elected office be chosen is by direct vote. I'll go back into the 17th Amendment, but I want to bring it to something that's currently occurring, which are two discussions to further erode the logic that was intrinsic in the Constitution, which is people now the progressives primarily throw large campaigns to try to say that the equal apportionment among states for senators, where there's two per state, is unjust and makes no sense, right? California has an extraordinarily large population, but they only get 2 senators. They're failing to be represented in the legislature based off of the population size that they have. And someone like a place like Idaho has 2 senators too. Why do they have equal representation in the Senate? We should make it equal just the same way, basically duplicate the House of Representatives. The same way occurs with the voting for president and the Electoral College, right? Okay, this winner take all system we have, we should just have the national popular vote. So if those two new changes came in, we would have House of Representatives elected by the same group of people who are electing the Senate, who are electing the same people who have the presidency, and you just go D or R when you pull those levers, and boom, your entire life is chosen. Because an individual voter does not care in any way whatsoever about the nuances of the position they are electing. Mm-hmm. They want a set of promises that they think that person will work to bring. Mm-hmm. So the roles that they are filling are not the person they're electing for those roles is not judged based off of what the role is supposed to be doing. It's just on the things that they're delivering, the things that they promise to deliver. And that, of course, will lead to a situation where the people will want stuff that is unconstitutional, and the people they've elected will give them stuff that's unconstitutional. You will wind up with that despotism and the usurpation of powers that'll erode all of the states' rights that would exist, because the national elections gain more focus, and that's what we all talk about. I'm arguing with people in Ohio about the federal government more than I'm arguing with people of Pennsylvania about Pennsylvania government. Mm-hmm. Now, the 17th Amendment started this process back in the early progressive era and Woodrow Wilson as a purposeful change in the way that senators were elected in order to foster this future. It was directly determined. Mm-hmm. It was deliberately set to destroy and erode the things that prevented the federal government from taking the power that it wants to take. The original way that senators were chosen was they were chosen by the legislatures of the states themselves. And this is a strict, mechanistic, important way of balancing influences from different. If you imagine a company, just a large company, and you have regular employees, let's say on the ground floor, and then you have managers in one department and managers in another department. The managers, the people working on the floors, the different branches that control different parts of the company, they all have different experiences and different considerations for their own departments. But if the people on the floor just dictated the whole company, they wouldn't understand the individual departments and their considerations. Now, each of the states, going back to the beginning of the Constitution, the states themselves were sort of these little micro countries, right? And while there was a lot of free flowing in the early colonies, people still largely maintained to their own sort of corner of the world, and they had their own small cultures developing and their own preferences for government locally. And those were strong considerations that they had, and the cohesiveness that was required to bring them all together towards the United States as we know it now was a set of compromises that tried to make sure that those states with their sovereignty wouldn't be overridden by this new federal government. And one of those, in the constitutional debates where they were trying to ratify it, one of the compromises was talking about how we were going to choose the senators. And that was then eventually decided and agreed upon to be equally apportioned and chosen by the legislature. So now the legislature, who is actually concerned with the federal government encroaching on its rights, okay, violating its ability to have legislation for its citizens, it is now selecting people who are kind of in a conceptual, not necessarily opposition to the people that are being elected for the House of Representatives. They're not in opposition in the sense that they are two opposite considerations, but now it is a perspective that is not actually able to become from the people. I can move from my state to another state and pick up my life and just move there fairly easily. Now, of course, it's difficult, or people can't just move without cost, but my ability to move to a different state means that my considerations and my opinions are not tied necessarily to my specific geography. Some of them are, but by and large, the things I want in life are going to stay consistent no matter where I live. And that disconnects me from my state and my state's considerations about its sovereignty and what it might want. Mm-hmm. Whereas, of course, the legislature, they have an interest in making sure that the things they control are the things they control. And you can also think of this with the second change, which is the 16th Amendment, which is the federal income tax. The federal government extracts large amounts of money from each of the states via the population. And then they have to argue, each of these states have to argue about what they get back. You have all these pork barrel laws coming through where things are padded and you promise this to, some senator wants to deliver something to his people. So he argues that he gets more of this money. You got a weapons manufacturer in Ohio. So he wants the weapons manufacturers to get a large cut. And so you have this thing where the federal government takes money from the people in the state in order to then bribe the states back with their own money, right? That was taken. If you imagine that those senators were now chosen by the state legislatures themselves, the states might have an interest in stopping that extraction in the first place, stopping that money from going out. Particularly California could see and go like, hey, whoa, we're not getting enough money back based on what we're giving. We're going to stop this. So if you can imagine just how decisions change and incentive structures change by that one thing, whether or not you agree with me that that's the correct way to go back to, you can kind of understand why I would think it would make a drastic difference in the way that the federal government is able to encroach on power right now. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, the people are electing every single thing, and increasingly in a way that just makes pulling that lever for D or R a simple prospect. Now, it doesn't even matter who is running for any of these individual places as long as they represent that party. And that party has its own power structure, and that party has its own influence and things it would like to do in the federal government to change the way it operates and the powers they would like to have. Of course, obviously, to better serve the party. Yeah. So I can certainly go into deeper details of some of those things, but I think that might do well to summarize the thing that I think could change the most. That if I were to focus all my attention on, it would be that.
Repealing the 16th and 17th.
Yeah, it'd be preferably both, but the 17th will do.
Yeah. I think that a lot of what you describe is a mechanical issue for our government, but there's also just how it's baked into our view of ourselves as Americans. I wonder to what extent any given person is really tied to their state. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are tied to their state, and there's different, social activities that help to increase the thickness of that bond. Sports teams is probably like the easiest example to come upon, but, more and more of us are transgenerationally kind of just cut off. And, I grew up in California. I spent time in Chicago. My parents moved me around all over California, but we were pretty Californian. Now I'm up in Washington, and my wife's from Texas, and we're trying to think, well, we need some roots here. We kind of need some roots. We're lacking that. But I think that that's just kind of the American experience. And so where our attention eventually lands as a people is on the national scale. And we make a big to-do about Trump and Kamala because we have so little to do with our Chamber of Commerce down the street.
That is correct. And it would not be an overnight panacea, right? Everything that has been done at the federal level would still be in place. Let's pretend that I got, I managed to get the 17th Amendment repealed just by this talk, right? Yeah. And so I got my wish next week, and everything, reverts to the way I wanted it. Obviously, every thing that's already been done, every other change that's already been instilled will still be in place the day that that happens. And you are correct that in our current modern environment, people are less focused on their where they're staying right now. Yes, they might care about the local schools if they're starting a family.
Yeah, right.
But by and large, their mind, which is again actually was the point that I was making when it came to the federal usurpation of the states' rights, which is people are generally only concerned with their, what they want, which is not tied to the state. That does eventually change. It wouldn't be overnight, but it does eventually change when the place you go to get the things you want is no longer the federal government. So as the states enforce their sovereignty, assuming to the extent that it works the way that I would hope, where certain things at the federal level will be removed. If the states were to regain their sovereignty by this change that I would be advocating for, then the things that you are actually want would no longer be capable of being delivered at the federal level, and then the states themselves could promise you those things. And while you still may wind up with despotism and tyranny, it would be much more localized to your state because you voted for it that way, and then you can deal with your state's government structure to solve that problem if you want to, right? It just wouldn't be nationalized the way that it is now, where now the all of the money is focused on the federal campaign, and the states are a byproduct, to the point where most people don't even know who they're going to be voting for representative. It's just a D or R, right? You have those down ballot votes. They're so convenient because they want them to be. The ways that your attention would have to shift, because the things that you're trying to vote for would no longer be possible at the federal level, ideally, would then by design change your focus. And even though your preferences would change or would stay the same no matter where you lived, the people that you had to deal with would be your neighbors more closely.
Do you think that this would forestall well, do you think a national divorce is inevitable? Do you think that this would forestall that by allowing the states?
I don't foresee a national divorce in any way whatsoever.
Like a self-sorting mechanism of more conservatives moving to Florida or whatever, that kind of thing.
There are no. Well, let's say Florida. Let's pretend that you like Florida right now, and you start to have a diaspora to Florida. People in Texas could have been thought of as the previous Florida. And there is concerns now of people from California fleeing California and going to Texas and turning Texas blue. So there's not a long-term solution in just trying to get all of the like-minded national divorce people into one state to have your national divorce. If you start to do the migrations and you fail in your national divorce plan, now you've all moved, and maybe you'll make the state pretty cool for a while, but you'll still be pissed off at the national government structure usurping all the things. You won't be divorced, and now you'll be one state that is fighting all of the other states because you all corralled there. I don't necessarily see that that's going to work out, and I also don't foresee a national divorce. I don't as hyperbolic and as threatening as some people like to boast, that it's time to renew the tree of liberty from time to time sort of rhetoric. I don't believe that there's going to be any situation where an actual full breakout of civil war-like violence would occur with a clear geographic distinction to separate.
Secession, or it doesn't necessarily have to be violent.
I could imagine a state seceding much more easily than any other type of thing, but I also don't see a state seceding as being a realistic proposition, primarily because if you were to imagine a state seceding, it would have to have a concept of being more self-sufficient in everything it had to offer. Because the moment it secedes, one of the punishments that could be given for its secession is some sort of economic conflict with the federal government or even its partners. Okay. The United States government says to the UK, to the EU in general, do not trade with these people. Okay. You'd have a almost Taiwan-like situation
Yeah.
Okay. The federal government is not going to treat secession as like, oh, okay, I guess we lost that race. Okay, good luck to you. We love you. No, they're going to fight to keep hold of that state, particularly because the ones that could be self-sufficient are also the revenue bringers. You're not going to let your biggest cash cow, depart. Okay. So, a smaller state wouldn't have the ability to assure that it would be self-sufficient. It would also be economically cut off. So that makes it unlikely to ever really happen. I could see an attempt that could be successful from a voting standpoint, but I don't think the experiment would be successful. Let me be more specific in what I don't think would be successful. I could see a state going through the motions of seceding and even attempting to vote on ratifying their secession more readily than any other scenario of a civil war or type scenario or national divorce. But it wouldn't work out in practice because we would have the global hegemony working in collusion with the United States to prevent that state from being a successful new state.
Mm-hmm. Does the federal government have a pressure point where it can be leveraged to reform itself? Is there a path towards reformation, or is that kind of
other than that
dream?
17th Amendment choice? I'm a little pessimistic on that. Really, any wins that we have on rolling back stuff will be short-lived because the reasons that those things were enacted in the first place still exist.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that we can't have a moderately decent life for a very long time without the types of tyranny that we would dread, absolutely making the life that we live untenable, right? But the ways that the federal government chips away at our rights and could wind up with a much more despotic totalitarian control of the information we're allowed to receive, turning us sort of into just slaves of the state. That threat is going to be in existence even if for a period of time we convince the current population to retract and to retreat. Because unless we do something to stop the ability of the population, for lack of a better phrase, being mind controlled into voting the federal government more power than it was afforded to have, that it's the threat is always going to be there and the ability is always going to be there. The federal government is fantastically good at finding ways to cheat their own system to gain more power. I won't go into too large of a detail, but one of the best examples of this is the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, which is a clause that was set up to just try to say that one of the roles of the federal government, its limited roles, is to try to make sure that states don't wind up in economic competition to the point where they go to war. Okay, so Pennsylvania isn't going to set up tariffs against Ohio in such a way that we're causing huge economic competition battles that risk citizens actually going to war with each other. So this Commerce Clause was saying, like, okay, look, the federal government's kind of going to arbitrate some of this trade that you guys have, and so if there's cross-state tariffs, that's going to be done at the federal level. We're not going to let you guys start doing these individual machinations and that threaten to create disharmony across all the states. Okay, so that simple concept actually is the way that progressives in particular have wiggled their foothold into legislating and controlling activity in the United States that they otherwise wouldn't control. And if someone wants a quick bootstrap of that, the best place for a bootstrap is Gonzalez versus Reich from the Bush administration was a federal case where some people in California were growing marijuana on their own land, and the federal government came and arrested them, penalized them for working with marijuana. Again, this was the Bush administration, and marijuana is what they call a Schedule I drug. It still is, despite its ubiquity now. It's kind of like a law that's no longer being enforced situation or enforced selectively for whatever political reasons they want to. But it's still technically illegal on the federal level because it's a Schedule 1 drug with no legitimate medical purposes according to that schedule. And these people were growing marijuana on their own land in California. So when they got arrested and were for this, Clarence Thomas wrote a dissent for this ruling because the ruling affirmed the government's involvement in penalizing them for growing this marijuana. And the reason is that the allowance. So let me quickly go back to the changes in the Progressive Era. The 18th Amendment is the amendment that made the prohibition for alcohol a constitutional, right? It said there was a constitutional amendment saying alcohol is prohibited in the United States. Now, rarely do I ever see someone have a light bulb and they ask, why did we need a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol, but we didn't need a constitutional amendment to ban marijuana? Mm-hmm. The answer to that is this usage of the Commerce Clause. So anything the federal government wants to control, they just throw in this Commerce Clause inside of the text. So they say affecting interstate commerce. You'll see that sprinkled throughout. If you ever want to know, for example, child pornography is horrible. Okay, we don't need to say that someone is pro child pornography in this discussion to make this point. But the only reason the federal government can legislate on child pornography in general is because it typically involves sending pornography across state lines, or somehow the pornography was involved in interstate commerce in some way. The packets on your, before packets on the internet, it was literally stuff people would be sending each other in the mail, VHS tapes or whatever illicit things. And in order to have the federal government come in and try to stop the procurement and the spreading of child pornography, it had to cross state lines, and they allowed it to be in their purview. So that was just an example of something that is under the federal purview strictly because of this state lines thing. If you want to learn how the federal government starts to control stuff, you'll find the Commerce Clause sprinkled throughout the legislation. Everywhere.
Is that also how it got the power to enact the civil rights legislation and meddle around with freedom of association?
I would have to look into those ones specifically. I mean, there might have been other mechanisms. They're not limited to one mechanism, but by and large, they will use the Commerce Clause, which does restrain them sometimes, because sometimes they won't get involved. The federal government won't get involved if they don't have the interstate excuse that something crossed state lines. This is where when Kyle Rittenhouse was,
is that why that
on trial?
Became the
That's why they
talking?
kept. He crossed state lines. He crossed state lines. It's the biggest crime in the world to cross state lines. But going back to the original thing, Gonzalez v. Reich was where they had grown marijuana on their own land, and the federal government came in and asserted that they needed to be stopped to begin. Anyway, so they penalized them. I don't remember what their punishment was. Maybe several years in prison or a large fine. I don't remember what it was, but the Supreme Court at the time affirmed the federal government had the right to stop them. And Clarence Thomas wrote a dissent that everyone should read if they want to kind of understand more, because it's a great dissent. But he explains that the way that the federal government is invoking this Commerce Clause is preposterous, because they are asserting the argument that was apparently used to say that this was a valid instantiation of the Commerce Clause was that the people growing their marijuana would have purchased this marijuana on the market. And there was a high probability that marijuana would have crossed state lines. And by growing it on their own land, they affected the price in the market for marijuana, therefore affecting interstate commerce, making the federal government's ability to stop them legitimate. Okay, very fascinating. If you ever want to get into the weird ways that the federal government has tried to contort itself to be allowed to control something it otherwise isn't allowed to control. So again, just to summarize that, ask yourself a question: why did we need an 18th Amendment to ban alcohol but not marijuana? The way that it does it is the Commerce Clause, and the way that they have enacted the Commerce Clause is completely perverted. And you wind up understanding the way that the federal government will almost always try to find a way to get around it,
because that's its turf. Its turf is between the states, so that's how it can go into
and literally trying to regulate the commercial activity from a standpoint of taxation and other sorts of things to prevent war.
Yeah, to prevent war.
Or prevent, states wanting to secede, right? Because they're getting too upset with each other.
Yeah. Do you think that the federal government will eventually collapse, or do you think there'll be a moment of reform in the next couple decades?
So there's going to be a lot of things that I'm worried about coming up the pike with respect to the government's ability to borrow and spend. We all know that the national debt is astronomical. Now they did give themselves some time by inflating the heck out of the place and making the value of every single one of those dollars lower, therefore making the amount that they technically owed from any money that was borrowed at the time of a less value, right? That's one way that they kind of cheat themselves out of having to pay particular debts, because they raise money by selling the bonds. The bonds have a particular interest rate attached to them. So if the people who are owed the money are guaranteed a particular dollar amount above what they purchased. So if you inflate the money, you're still paying them the dollar amount, but now the purchasing power of that dollar is less.
Was that inevitable? They painted themselves in the corner. That's just the way it goes, right? Like this is
going back to really why Woodrow Wilson was an asshole, he created the Federal Reserve and set all that up. So
yeah, in order to revolutionize
in general, they believe that the power should be concentrated in the federal government, primarily by the executive, which is why you have the wide administrative state, right? That they making these decisions ad hoc as opposed to legislatively by the legislature, and that borrowing and performing whatever you want to do as the government whenever you want to, and printing money, to be able to perform these things is also something you should be doing. So it's inevitable. It is inevitable from the standpoint that some politician somewhere will always want to reenact the same things. So some of this stuff even goes back to Hamilton, who was really pro centralized federal government sort of guy.
Central currency.
Right, exactly. So you'll
but
always
that's the reason why the argument that I could see is that's the reason why America got to where it is. I mean, the being able to leverage that diverse economic powerhouse of all these different states.
Okay,
there was a speed bump with the Civil War, but after World War II, like that's just an immense amount of power. So of course,
we look at the world that we have today, and things are pretty cool. Okay. The way that the internet has revolutionized the world is pretty sweet. I get to watch streaming videos whenever I want. The catalog of entertainment that I have available to me is amazing. The cars, our modes of transportation make it such that if I on a whim want to travel across the country, I could probably with little arrangement do it, be able to do it technologically speaking. Mm-hmm. The world we now exist in is immensely wonderful. The question becomes whether or not the federal government taking these types of powers and becoming the hegemony that it is, and having this federal government structure that is in basically micromanaging a lot of the economy, and the power of the Fed to print and money on a whim almost, and all these things, whether or not you have to say that those are necessary to create this awesome world that we live in is of a impossible question to really answer, because you're talking about 100 years of not having the alternate world to deal with. Mm-hmm. And a lot has happened. The nuclear bomb didn't exist. Quantum physics wasn't even a contemplation at the time that these things were put in. So imagining the degree to which the modern world would be identical had the federal government not taken all of that power is very difficult to do. I can only really make the argument.
Would it ever give up that power, though? I mean, it just seems contrary to how these systems operate.
So there are several ways to, let's say, repeal the 17th Amendment if that was the direction we were going to go to try to change something. There are several ways of getting a constitutional amendment that don't necessarily care whether the federal government gave up that power, so to speak. Okay, if you get the amendment in, you get the amendment in. So there's ways that the states can ratify those that are removed from the federal government being involved. So again, if things change the way that I was talking about, immediately it wouldn't change, because the changes to the federal government, the laws that they've gotten passed in the meantime, the way that they behave, the Commerce Clause type of stuff would be identical. Nothing would change overnight. But over time, I would believe that the states would take back more and more of their sovereignty. Like in post-COVID era, you've seen governors and attorney generals of different states try to use their sovereign nation to combat some of the federal government's usurpation.
Well, I mean, in Washington, they went along, they doubled down on what the Fed wanted. Like they went pretty hard.
Yeah, but in some cases, though, the states have won certain battles.
Yeah.
But if you just imagine that whatever motive force does exist within the states to try to fight for their own sovereignty, and now just gives them an extra layer where they're selecting senators again, the battle might actually be able to retreat from where the federal government has usurped.
But it takes the citizens locating their locus of control closer to home. That's ultimately
and that would be very difficult because in the modern space, a discussion of the 17th Amendment is not going to be particularly fun or sensational.
If you can tie it to abortion, man, it'll have some
exactly.
legs.
Yeah, those sorts of things. You have to pick the topics of the day to try to make the argument to wiggle it in, and it doesn't afford itself that many, except in times of real obvious government overreach. Then you might be able to sneak that in as a major thing that people will understand, because otherwise you have to get their attention first of all to say, hey, look, this is important. Then you have to somewhat take them on a historical journey, convince them that the change actually would provide them with things they want. Yeah. So it's definitely an uphill battle. I'm not saying
you've carved yourself out a pretty difficult position to advocate for, but I'm glad you have a position. Yeah, I'm glad you have one. So what's coming up with you? Anything public facing? I guess you're rather a private individual. You're a non-Twitter account aside. But do you have anything that's giving you excitement?
I don't have anything particularly to announce. I mean, like I kind of just said, I'm working on some things to try to hedge my bets of how I'm going to be engaged. If let's say Kamala wins, even if with Trump wins, I'll still be probably doing some of the things I'm doing in the background. Without going into details, I'm keeping details light because one, I'm not necessarily publicly announcing it. It's just stuff I'm working on. But also if I delay or don't deliver on my original timelines, I have no one to answer to.
No foul. Yeah,
exactly. So, but if I believe that a Kamala Harris administration is going to increase the amount of despotic activity that comes in squelching free speech and information flows to the point where they're not just actually getting rid of annoying things that we all can kind of agree are instances of some stupid jerk being a stupid jerk, and they start to, as they would obviously do, control the information flows for their own purposes to make sure that they are dominating the propaganda in the world. In determining what I'm going to, do in response to knowing or predicting that is the world that I'm going to exist in, I'm going to be working behind the scenes to make sure that at a minimum, I have uninterrupted information flows, gathering me relevant information.
Are these like the spiders that Google used to create its empire?
You can think of something involving some of that. Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Unless they
cool.
get wise and say, hey, this guy knows a detail he's not supposed to and shut me down because I am beholden to some of the internet structure existing.
Yeah, I'll get suicided
for me to
with
do that. But, trying to think of my own ways of participating in opposition and not allowing the despotism to catch me off guard. That's again, it's not too many details for people to know what I'm even talking about, but
do you have a hero historically or present in the present? This present era?
If I were to just pick one individual, I would just say Thomas Sowell is the greatest of all time. He's probably going to be one of the most important figures for modern conservative / libertarian persuasions to point.
What's his foundational work for people who haven't yet encountered him?
My favorite Thomas Sowell book is The Vision of the Anointed. which is it's not necessarily one of his more deep academic books. It's much more political current events oriented, but it's going to be a long lasting book. And basically what it does is talks about experts and how they get to be wrong over and over again, and nothing of consequence ever happens to their reputation. And it is one of my favorite books of his that he writes, because while it does talk about things that are contemporaneous to the time he wrote it, maybe off by 2 decades, because he's talking about after effects of people not losing credibility. The point is still long lasting, and actually a very important point for people to take on, which is that anytime people come and tell you about the future, and that's going to be this way, and they're promoted as the expert, and now you got to go through all of these changes. You have to get engaged to stop these things from happening. In particular, one of the best examples of this is Paul Ehrlich, who is famous for writing a book, The Population Bomb, where he gambled that by 1980 that we'd have 100,000 human beings left or something. Like it was millions of people were going to die from starvation, because he was what they call a Malthusian, right? That the human population growth couldn't have enough sustenance to maintain itself, and so there'd be widespread death and starvation because we didn't have enough resources to keep our own thing. And of course the 80s came and none of that happened, and Paul Ehrlich was still able to be respected in communities for his analysis and his thoughts, and it's always around the corner, that population collapse. So we're right there. He was just off by 50 years. Still a great guy, just off by 50 years. But he actually would propose outrageous things like forced sterilization to try to prevent new births.
The kids are signing up for it now.
There are some voluntary forced sterilization, I guess.
Yeah.
But no, so it's that book, I think, is one of the best books to start with from Thomas Sowell's standpoint. But he would be my favorite.
Is there a contemporaneous villain or evil doer that you can't help but loathe on the political scene right now, or just the world scene right now? Who's your...
There may be, but they don't consume my brain to where I can grab one. Grab one quickly for you, so I don't ruminate.
Do you have a recommendation for heroes? Do you have a recommendation for a villain? If somebody is looking for a good, easy villain to vilify, to do the opposite
based on this
of
conversation, you just go back to Woodrow Wilson and that modern progressive era. There will be plenty.
Why was he such an asshole? Why was he such a bastard?
Well, he deliberately enacted a campaign to erode the protections of the federal government and the checks and balances that kept.
What was driving him?
He believed in what they call the administrative state. He was a very he was a PhD and one of the first PhD presidents, and he was an academic. So if you want to loathe academics,
he's the expert.
He was the expert. And he had
emperor of experts.
Yeah, he had a concept of empire. I mean, he's ultimately responsible for the idea that America's role in the international space is to push. Make the world safe for democracy, like push American ideals and export them as one of our prime outputs, which he got involved with the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, trying to make this.
Do you think you would be shocked where the America ended up with the progress pride flags being exported?
He wouldn't be too happy with all the African Americans that are running for office.
He was not of the persuasion of
he was not a particularly. I mean, he was a eugenicist, so he was a big fan of eugenics and did.
Well, they all were. I mean, it was the cool thing to be.
He also really had a fond he loved the KKK and thought that they were kind of just a really good local policeman for the area. So like he's just by and large untoward character for my tastes.
Wow.
And he was a spearhead for the early progressive movement that eroded a lot of the protections of things that more libertarian minded people like myself would. So it's perfectly fine to pick Woodrow Wilson as a villain.
To loathe for you approve of that, particular pinata.
Yeah.
Well, ROLLERGATOR, thank you very much for swinging by for some election coverage and deep state, ponderings.
Well, thanks for being patient and allowing my year-long delay.
Yeah, no, it was very fascinating. I'll have to have you back with that other reptile crocoduck. He's focusing on the Israel thing right now, which we haven't touched on. We don't need to right now.
I'm fine doing it. It's just not my central motivator, so I don't know which it's gonna.
Yeah, I'm going to give that one for a break. It was fine enough just talk about like the next week. What's your desired outcome for the election? Just a swift victory either way, swift Trump victory?
I would
or do you
prefer-
really want maximum chaos, like a very tiny Harris win?
I would actually really prefer if Trump's win was decisive in a way that doesn't afford his opponents to, well, just not to mount the campaigns that are going to be a pain in the butt to go through, like the 14th Amendment arguments that I talked about and those sorts of things. Make it pretty much untenable for them to win any of them. Because if it's close Trump win, then they will mount those, and we don't know on the individual basis which ones might succeed or how hard they will be to stop.
You're more concerned with those efforts than any type of rigging that might, or foul play that might be going on.
There's only there's only so much rigging that you can do to overcome. It's also kind of comes in tandem with the actual vote itself. So there was great motivating force for people to vote against Trump and also be persuaded to do shady things to stop him. I'm not getting that sense this time around that it is to the degree. Now, of course, there are motivated people, but you have to motivate a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I don't know if a large number of people, because because there will be real votes, right? Anyone who believes that there are shenanigans also has to accept there are real votes that you are also competing with. So to the degree to which there are cheats or there are shenanigans, one, it's not universal. Not every area is liable to the same corruption as some areas might be. And so you have to compete only in the areas where you have the corrupt hold to try to outweigh the places where the legitimate vote has now given you a task. Right. And so you can't, there are natural preventions that can, and it just has to be decisive. So if it's close, not only we're going to have to in one swing state, not only we're going to have to go through the process of recounting and fighting that way, we're then also, even if he ekes out a win, we're going to have to go deal with all the efforts to stop him. And if it's decisive, then that'll be the most optimistic rhetorical way to kind of stop some of the arguing going forward for a short period of time. They will begin right away when he's inaugurated and everything he does is horrible. But for the interim period, they will have to accept the reality as it's reported to them,
which would be better than not. May the best candidate win, and may their win be too big to rig.
We'll survive if Kamala is if Kamala wins. Or it's stolen for Kamala, right? We'll survive. However, the things that I'm concerned about will absolutely start to become, the progression, and you will have to start to consider yourself and how you want to orient your reaction to it. So instead of possibly only being reactive, you might want to be proactive in building some information sources that you can rely on and ways that you can share information with friends that might be able to beat censors and those things.
Yeah. I'm fine with YouTube, man. They've been great for me. So wait, unless I say the wrong word or talk about certain medical interventions.
Well, after one of our last talks, didn't you get banned from?
Yeah, I got banned because I talked to a doctor about how a certain medical intervention actually works in the human body, and you're not supposed to talk about it. You can't talk about it. You can talk. The discussion was actually about why you can't talk about these things, and we accidentally talked about those things because it was fascinating knowledge, with these things going into your DNA and rewriting things and needing updates and stuff.
I do get the sense that in this interim period, not necessarily if Kamala wins, but in this interim period, some of the social media companies, even some of the worst actors like Facebook, have relaxed a little bit on the censorship.
Yeah, I've sensed that too.
Making it seem almost like they recognize their mistake. I don't necessarily believe that if the tides turn and Kamala wins, but in the short-term period, things have seemingly been better.
Yeah, we'll see how the power structure.
But shifts. Elon also will become the number one villain if Trump wins, and Twitter will be the focus. He can take it, but if Trump wins, the Twitter will become enemy number one, and it'll be insane.
Isn't that kind of cool? Or is that perturbing? I mean, it's good for competition,
It's going
right?
to be exhausting.
Yeah,
you know,
exhausting. Yeah,
they're going to
take things to heart that I'm surprised that you take to heart.
What do you mean?
But I don't know. You're honest, authentic individual. Caps lock aside, but you know, like just describing like the information warfare is exhausting. Speaks to like your concern for the truth and how much it wears on you that people are liars and lying and being lied to and then being swept up in falsehoods.
There is a degree to which all of that is just human nature. So it's going to be what you have to do. In order to fight for the future you want, you have to engage in the information warfare. The thing that gets me the most though is when you also have to go against the state to be able to even say the things that are on your mind. And of course, you know, if I say something that is true and I can demonstrate, you know, convincingly that the thing I am asserting is true, and yet I still am at risk of being banned from a particular platform because the federal government has told these people that the things I am saying are wrong. That is not just obviously unacceptable, but that is personally frustrating on a level that is leaps and bounds between people disagreeing with me or calling me untoward names.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did try to incite a slap fight, like literal violence between Justin Trudeau and Jordan B. Peterson.
I understand, but Trudeau's an asshole and deserves to be slapped with a leather glove. So,
well, maybe he'll get slapped metaphorically in the polls. I mean, he's not up for re-election.
I don't pay attention to Maple Land's politics.
Yeah, it's kind of fallen to the wayside.
I mean, you know, there were certain things that I paid attention to when they were prominent, which is the way that because sometimes the way that a trend occurs in one country predicts the way that the winds are going to blow in another. And that was the trucker convoy whenever they were starting to actually take freeze funds of their political opposition. That's absolutely something that could also occur in the United States. So that became a huge.
I thought Biden was like, I think that's a little too far.
There are definitely times where they realize, okay, we can't do that yet. We want to. Yeah. We totally want to.
Yeah, but they totally shoot their hand. This is what we want to do, and this is what we will do. But oh shoot, we shouldn't have done that just quite yet.
Yeah, you can't let these people just swish money around.
Yeah, no. That and maids are the two most prescient Canadian exports that I'm peaked about.
So, well, thanks for having me back.
Thanks a lot, Gator. I'm going to end the recording. Do you have a favorite cocktail or some sort of repast that you most enjoy, just for a little bit of trivia, Gator trivia?
So there's a brand of vodka that is sort of like become my favorite. It's a very tiny brand. It's not, it's one of those custom distilleries. And it has a habanero vodka.
Okay.
And it is not like an artificial flavoring added after the fact. The vodka is literally like seeped in habaneros, and it's just a beautiful bite. And they also have a ginger, Hanson of Sonoma.
Okay.
They have a ginger version too, and the ginger one is absolutely wonderful. It's a nice sipping vodka, the ginger one. Habanero is probably slightly better as a mixer for things, because some people don't want to drink habanero directly. I do enjoy it sometimes. After a long day, the little extra bite. So it's not just a alcohol burn. It's actually like, a little peppery burn.
Yeah.
That is my favorite alcohol brand, I believe.
That's great. Thank you for that bit of trivia. Thank you for your afternoon, and Godspeed in this coming election. But I just don't see you. I don't see you really pulling it.
Don't trust the propaganda.
Okay, whatever. That's right. And boom. All right, buddy. Thank you.